Hello and welcome. This is an animated book review of The Gene, written by Siddharta and Mikherjee. We will go through this book in 3 stages: discovery, abuse, and future. The story of The Gene begins in 1864 with a lonely monk named Gregor Mendel, which is a part of an experiment stumbled on probably the most important biological discovery made in the 20th century. A discovery which shows us that the instructions and biological mapping that creates our bodies, our mind, and our hearts are something of kind of like a unit, which is passed along, intact from generation to generation. Gregor noticed that when experimenting on the plants, that the parent plants passed on specific traits to the next generation of plants, unaltered. When mixing a tall plant with a dwarf plant, for example, it would not create a mid-sized offspring, which might indicate a blending of parental traits. In these type of plants, tallness is a dominant gene, which overrides the trait of dwarfism. In noticing these facts, Mendel had discovered the smallest block of heredity, the gene. A few years later, Mendel's work was mended together with Darwin's theory of evolution. Their work was published together with a botanist called Hugo de Vries, and published while Mendel was still in school. Darwin's theory, as most of us know, is the belief that all creatures, rather than it being a gift from God, everything is evolved. Human evolved from monkeys and so forth. De Vries pushed the work that Mendel initiated even further and came to different conclusions on why genetic differences occur from time to time. He concluded that a lot of variations that occurred to the genes were accidental and created freaks of nature, as he would call them, mutants. The work of the 3 scientists formed a complete view of species evolution. Our surroundings produce random skill sets and is then passed on to our offspring, and naturally over time some generations die and some survives. In 1940s, the scientists continued what Mendel started all these years ago. They found the more detailed version of it being something called DNA. This is the true building stone to everything in our body. These are the real building blocks. These tell everything in our body what to do, when to do it, and how it should be done. The DNA strings are built out of blocks and will work and cooperate as a whole. You see, a person's height isn't the result of a single block in the DNA string. It's a team effort of several components in the string. You can compare this to a screen, for example. You can't see much on just one pixel, but if you put thousands of pixels together, you have everything shown on it. Yet, you can't just draw conclusions on visible traits such as length or looks. You see, one's traits are much affected on its environment and diet. A boxer's nose, for example, isn't shaped purely because his DNA string looks in a certain way. His nose is deformed by several hard punches against his face. The connection between genes and visible traits isn't always so straightforward. Abuse. While researchers continued to look into this area, they eventually slided into the area of how the knowledge could be used to improve the human being. A new field was formed called eugenics. This is a set of beliefs and practices that aims at improving the genetic quality of a human population. Francis Galton invented the term eugenics in 1883. He thought that by selective breeding, you could optimize the outcome of another generation. Thing is, it's not that simple. See, it takes tens and thousands of years before we get any real change in the genes. These new topics created some really nasty actions though. Court-ordered sterilizations first started in State Virginia on October 19, 1927. A woman named Carrie Buck was deemed feeble-minded, and based on the logic that a sterilization would prevent her from creating feeble-minded children. And as you all know, a few years later this truly escalated into Nazi Germany, where Adolf Hitler decided to create the defect-free race people. Hitler would use the theories from Mendel and de Vries and justify sterilizations and later on extermination. By the end of the war, the Nazis had killed some 11 million people. This showed the world how this knowledge can get twisted, and the topic of eugenics became taboo for generations to come. Future. DNA is amazing. It's a complete map to what is going to happen to your body. It's like biological fate. In Cambridge 1970, a couple of students decided to map out every cell in an earthworm, all 1,031 of them. They found that they could not only predict which role the cells would play. For every 12 hours specific cells would divide, and they also noticed from time to time that cells disappear at specific times. In other words, cells both divided and disappeared because DNA said so. In the 1970s, a lot of research was done on if and how one could change and manipulate the DNA. They knew that through reproduction the DNA could be changed naturally, but this process was, as we know, really slow. As you know, it took us a couple of million years to develop ourselves from the monkey. So everyone, of course, asked themselves, can we speed up this process a little bit? The first obstacle they try to pursue is, can they create new genetic combination in the lab? Later, Paul Berg and David Jackson found out that the answer to this actually was yes. The two guys successfully inserted a virus which has the same build as our own DNA stream. They've built a virus called SV40 from 3 other bacteria. They called it recombinant DNA, and the process would later be known as gene cloning. These guys proved that they could write completely new DNA strings. Then we asked more questions. Can we read the DNA instructions? As in, could we walk into the string and look at its abilities? Later on, in 1977, a guy managed to do just this. He successfully mapped all 5,386 base pairs of virus PHI X174. After this discovery, gene sequencing continued to develop, opening up for new possibilities through the whole spectrum. Last few years, we have begun to invent technology that allows us to prospectively, intentionally change the humans. If you imagine it like an encyclopedia, it's set up with around 21,000 odd genes, the Encyclopedia Act. This technology now enables us to go into the encyclopedia, identify one word, erase it, change it, and leaving the rest of the whole encyclopedia intact. What this means is we can go inside an embryo and change traits of the human being. That means we can go in and change the gene which is more likely to cause the person cancer, or the gene which causes the Huntington's disease, for example. Or let's say, in some near future, we can change a gene that will make humans more muscular, get higher IQ, be taller, and so forth. Further into this research came also the Genome project that has the revealer of our common ancestry and made this whole racist question a total bogus. We can now compare our genes to one another, and we found out that we are all very much alike, but also very different. Research have found out that it's only 100,000 years ago that we all lived on the same continent in Africa. Some tribes then migrated and later on became the white Europeans, among many other types of people. The thing is here that you can't compare a man from Namibia to a man from Ghana. These two persons are so genetically different that you can't even put these two in the same category. It goes the same for the Norwegian and a Danish man, Spanish and Italian. Everyone is so different, but still very much the same. So when someone says that a European is born more intelligent than an African, this is simply not true. Such a genetic variation would take millions of years. So all this information brings us to a complex discussion. Now that we know that we can in the near future enhance our DNA, what is race? What is identity? What is gender? What is sexuality? What this is, it's the birth and growth of one of the most beautiful, powerful, and most dangerous ideas that humans ever had. That concludes the book review. Don't forget to buy the book if you like this.